Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our presentation of Is Bad Metadata Costing You Money? My name is Chris Fernandez, and I'm your account manager. Today, Miles Kehoe, the president and CEO of New ID Engineering, will be presenting. And if you enjoyed today's webinar and have some of your colleagues that might be interested in the same webinar, well, we're going to do it again tomorrow morning at 8:30 Pacific time. So please have everybody sign up for that. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you the president of New ID Engineering, Miles Kehoe.
Thanks, Chris. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. Is bad metadata costing you money? I think you might have assumed by the question that we think it can cost you money, and we want to talk about how you can tell what it's doing and then how you can fix that problem. The way we're going to go through today is a quick introduction. I want to talk about some definitions so that as I go through the slides, you'll understand what I'm talking about in there. Then we're going to go right into the question of how much money is bad search really costing you, and that's related, of course, to bad metadata. And we're going to draw on some sort of the diamond of standards that many vendors hold up as the goal that was published in 2001 that I think has got some basic flaws we'll talk about. To understand the ROI, you really need to know the use cases. What do you mean by enterprise search? What is enterprise search to you? There are a lot of options there. We'll talk about that. And figuring out the ROI is different for each of those. We'll go through that as well. Also, then we'll talk about how do you recognize it, how will you know if you've got a metadata problem or a search problem, how you can go about fixing the problem, and then some key takeaways that you can find, hopefully some actions that you can do if you're checking your search responsibilities there. And by the way, Chris did mention that we're doing one tomorrow morning. We had some requests from European folks to do it earlier in the day, but we're also going to have this on our YouTube channel, Ask Dr. Search, by the end of the week, so keep an eye out for that. In way of quick introduction, I see a lot of familiar names on the webinar this morning. You may know who we are. We've been in business since 1996 and work on both sort of the business and technology side of search. That is, helping companies run their business well, because we think that's probably as important as the search platform that you use. And then also the technology. How do you implement it? Which technology do you use specifically for what you're looking for? And we help companies with that. We've always taken a vendor-neutral approach, and we do not only commercial but open source projects as well. We've been actually doing some stuff recently with Lucid Imagination, who you may know are the commercial branch of Lucid Solar. As a company, we're search analysts, search developers, consultants, and authors. We blog frequently at enterprisesearchblog.com. We're doing a presentation actually at Enterprise Search Summit next month that you're welcome to come attend, and we hope we can see you there. And we've also, Mark Bennett, who is my co-founder, we were co-authors of the book about Microsoft Search, Professional Microsoft Search, which talks about fast CSP as well as SharePoint Search. So let's begin looking at some terms I want to go through. I sort of talk about implicit metadata, explicit metadata. The implicit metadata is really the data about the file. And let me go to the next slide to sort of show that. Basically, what the search engine indexes, and you may have seen this a couple of months ago in one of our talks, the search engine index is what I call the virtual document, not just the contents of the file, but it's got some implicit metadata, the title of your report, the date, the file name, the URL, or the directory path. That's all sort of implicit metadata that gives you some clues about what the document is about. In a content management system like SharePoint, it may be the folder or library that it's in. There's obviously the content of the data, but then there's this explicit metadata that may be added statically. For example, you may have some taxonomies in your company. You may have those in place. Or it may be dynamic. It may be the kind of thing that gets generated on the fly as content is indexed. And we'll talk about some ways of doing that, some companies that do that later in the hour. And let's see, we've talked about the explicit, implicit data. One of the problems, of course, is a lot of times metadata is blank or duplicate. I don't know about you, but very often I'm guilty of when I start a new project or new presentation, I'll take one that I used before, and I'll use that as the basis for my background slides, put in the new content. You really have to make a point to remember to change the metadata, change the title of the author of the date, because it'd be pretty embarrassing if you're preparing a proposal for someone and you send off a proposal that has someone else's name in the metadata field. That happens more often than I like to believe in companies. I've done that myself. It's now one of my personal best practices to check that before I send any email out. But those are all important things that can be used to provide clues to the search engine when we're doing a search. Now, you've probably heard the term hard ROI and soft ROI. The hard ROI is it's return on investment that you can actually clearly define. That is, I can say, if I put this search in, I know that I can save $100,000 a year. That's I call that simple ROI, even though it sounds like it's hard ROI, but I call it simple because it's easy to determine what the return is. You'll know what the return is and how you can measure it. Soft ROI is a little more difficult. It's documents that you search. You can't quite tell what the return is. Maybe it's general enterprise search on your site, just a public website. What's the return on that? I can't tell you. So that's what I call tough ROI. It's tough. It's hard to do soft ROI. It's hard to know what that is. So they're a little bit, it sounds opposite there, but remember hard ROI is the thing that's easy to do. Soft ROI is the thing that's hard to determine. All right, so having confusion with that now, let's go ahead and jump on in. So back in, I think, 2001, Sue Feldman, who was an analyst at IDC, did a paper on figuring out how, the cost of bad search. What's the cost of poor search? And although it was done in 2001, that was a long time ago. You might remember that's before there was a Twitter. Not long after YouTube started. The prominent search engines at the time were Verity and Fulcrum and Excalibur in the legal market. But things were different. The big concern was, am I getting the repository of data? Now we've got all the repositories. The problem is we still can't find stuff. One of the things that Sue did in her report, and I really take exception to this. I'll go. You've seen this. You've heard this logic before because search vendors now use this to justify purchasing of their system. So it started off and saying, well, based on their studies, the average worker spends 2.5 hours a day searching. All right. Well, KW, the knowledge worker. Let's figure. No, knowledge worker is, let's say, is $100,000 a year weighted salary. That's about $384 a day. If your company has 5,000 knowledge workers, that's actually small when it comes to a lot of big enterprises. Annually, you work 260 days, so that means you're searching 81 days a year. Sue also said that half of all searches are poor, so poor searches are costing you 40 days a year, or $15,000, $15,500. If you multiply that in terms of number of employees, that means poor search is costing you $77 million a year. That's, you see down here the formula at the bottom. It's easy to calculate your total savings, your total cost there. And of course now search vendors have picked that up and said, oh, this is great, look at this. You can calculate how much bad search is costing you and buy our search engine and put it in for $500,000 and we'll save you $76.5 million. Clearly a benefit to buy our software, and that's the justification they'd like you to believe is a way to build search. There are a few flaws in the problem. Find the match there. First of all, I've talked to Sue about this a little bit, and we differ on it on a few points. But basically, when they were trying to gather their data, one of the questions they asked people is, how many hours a day do you look for information? They were thinking, how many hours do you search? But they said, how many do you look? So I'm thinking the average employee there listening said, well, gosh, if I'm looking for information, I spend a lot of time digging through my files because I know I've got it in here somewhere. Or I'll ask my coworker. You know, Tom always knows the answer. He's been on here for years. He probably knows. Or I might check my emails to see if someone's written about it, or I might even go down the hall to the corporate library. And oh yeah, okay, yeah, you're right. I may also search that intranet thing that's pretty new here because this is 2001. So yeah, 2.5 hours is probably reasonable. I think the problem is the 2.5 hour searching is not using the intranet. So I think that's a faulty assumption. As a cross-check, let's look at it this way. In 2.5 hours, I figure if you could do a search every 2 or 3 minutes, if you could block that 2.5 hours of search, just a particular 2.5 hour block, you could probably search every 2 or 3 minutes and have enough time to look at the results and figure out what's going on there. So you can do 50, 60 more searches a day. So if you've got 5,000 knowledge workers in a company, you should see in your search logs 250,000 searches a day. Well, we've done some work with some companies that have a lot of knowledge workers, and the preliminary estimates from them are saying we're about 5,000 searches a day coming. It turns out we're not spending 2.5 hours a day searching, and I think it's a faulty assumption to go with. One of the questions we need to figure out is what kind of search, what do you mean by enterprise search? I've sort of categorized them into 4 general areas here. I know you've heard of e-discovery. That's sort of the legal requirement. You have to make sure that if you're getting sued, you've got everything that happened. This is, think of some of the old cases that have been very public. E-commerce is you're selling things online. You're an eBay or Amazon. That's It's another type of search that you may be doing in your company. Then there's general search, external facing, and you might use that for sales and marketing, for tech support. People want to come in and search a help desk or do tech support like that. Shareholder information is one thing that's a great way for companies to get that information out to shareholders. And then reputation positioning. You want to position yourself as a cool company or a solid company or a company that really solves problems for people. Then there's the general internal facing search. And that's a little more difficult. It's going to have HR policies and procedures. Knowledge worker help, you might have a lot of information. For example, if you're a consulting firm, you'll have a lot of work about your projects. And you might have some information about products or whatever that your internal people can use. Sales support, essentially if you're preparing sales quotes and things like that, it's nice to be able to go off and figure out what we've done in the past, what kind of prices have we done there, what deals have we been successful on, and what can we do. If you're an R&D company, clearly research and development, they'll be searching inside to see what projects are similar to theirs, what projects might use this particular technology. And then there's internal help desk. They want to search to find out what people are having. When you have a problem with your PC, they want to be able to search and see what's going on. So I break these four categories of search into two general areas. The simple ROI case. These are the guys that have, in fact, I don't call it simple, but it's these guys that you can define a hard return on investment. E-discovery, well, the purpose for e-discovery is mostly Sarbanes-Oxley and litigation. The audience are lawyers and courts and prosecutors. E-discovery is driven by the C-suite. It's by the CEO, CIO. There's often a chief risk manager in the company. The ROI is to keep the chief risk officer's job is to keep the chief executive out of jail. That's the return. So when it comes to budget, the question is, what budget? Do it. So I've never heard of a chief risk manager who couldn't convince his fellow board members to get enough money to bring in search. So that's an option. E-discovery is one of those things that it's easy to figure out the return on investment. The CEO didn't get indicted. Your company didn't get fined millions of dollars by the government. You're successful. The other search that comes with a simple way to calculate the return, the hard return on investment because you're getting hard money back from it, is e-commerce. Now, not all companies have e-commerce, but if you're doing e-commerce, that's an enterprise search application. Your purpose is to sell products. Audience, of course, is consumers, your customers. E-commerce is driven by sales, and the ROI is improved profits. You know how much money you're making now with search vendor A. When you change to search vendor B, I'm making this much money, this much profits. I can measure that quite precisely. And the measure is more sales, higher profitability. Those guys have it easy. And I suspect a lot of you here today looking at some of the names here, I think you probably are not that lucky to be in the e-commerce area. Now we get to the things that are tough for coming up with a hard return. It's general external facing search. Generally around sales and marketing, when customers come to your site, do they stay and browse or do they come in once and bounce off and leave? Can shareholders who are looking for financial information, can they find what they're looking for? Also, it's positioning your company. You'd like to position yourself as a cool company because the perception is, and I think it's still accurate, that young people are the ones who are using the internet and they're the ones that will go to companies for information. If they can't find what they're looking for in a click or two, they're away to a competitor. You also have tech support. If you have a decent search, customers are happy to use it, and in fact, you can reduce your caseload. So in this tech support, there's a little bit of return on investment you can measure because, in fact, you're going to see reduced call load or reduced call length, and that can be a good measure. Also, it makes your people more efficient finding things. That's a soft, but if I'm looking for a paper that was done last year and I can find it, that saves me a little while. So it's really kind of a soft ROI because I can't tell you how much money we saved, but how long would it take if your CEO can't find his resume online? You know, that's, by the way, when you roll out a new search engine, the first thing you want to make sure is that if your CEO's name is typed in the search box, it produces really good results because, trust me, that's the first thing your CEO will do. Also, you've got community forums, crowdsourcing, things like that are sometimes outsourced. They're running on another system, but they're part of your website. So you need to be able to find that. And I tell you, even if you've got crowdsourcing and you're asking, people can ask questions and people can answer questions, you want to make sure you moderate because you want to make sure that you're actually answering the questions. You need some help there. And again, it's hard to say how much money you're going to save from that, but it's something that you feel like you just need to have. And then, of course, you still need good content no matter what you're putting out there because with that, all the help and community in the world won't solve your problems. By the way, if you have any questions, I see ones come up. If you don't mind, I'm going to wait until the end of the presentation, and then we'll take your questions at that point in time. So if you have a question, feel free to please hold on to it, and we'll get it at the end. Okay, the other tough ROI case is this general internal-facing search. This is what people usually think of when they think of enterprise search. So I sort of categorize into two different areas of enterprise search. There's the HR site, policies, procedures, company holidays, things like that. They drive the mundane kinds of things. They're sort of they're mostly static, and in fact, the research we've done, the companies we've worked with, show that the searches against this kind of repositories, HR, policy, procedures, those queries are usually the same. They're pretty static. There'll be a lot of questions for enrollment, for insurance plans, 401k purchases. This time of the year, of course, people ask about how do I get a copy of my W-2 because I lost it since you sent it to me in January. These are the kinds of questions that come up here, and those are the same questions all the time. For knowledge workers, then, there's a different kind of data there. For sales engineers, sometimes putting together a complex RFP response. Marcom, trying to find digital assets. I'm sure we did a video about that last year, but I can't remember what we called it. R&D wants to make sure they're not reinventing the wheel. Is it possible that one of our labs in Australia is working on very similar technology? I want to know that before I start. Or even more importantly, did they work on a technology like this and find that it didn't work? So you want to share that kind of knowledge, especially as companies distribute worldwide. And then internal help desk. The internal searchlights can help you spot problems as they come up and what people search for, where to look. So, for example, one of our customers is Cisco, and they came to us with a problem a few years ago, and that problem was that they're building these very complex, I think of Cisco, I think of a firewall, a router that I put in, I've got a single box. Most of Cisco's customers are people like telecom companies who are putting together huge switches, network switches that might have dozens of racks of systems up there, routers and firewalls and who knows what all. And when they have to answer an RFP or prepare a quote for a customer, they have to go through and figure out how much power does each of these devices use, how much heat dissipation do each one of them require, so they can know how to put their stack together, how to put these, how many racks they need, how to put them together, how close they need to be before they roll them out for a customer. And that was taking weeks of time to prepare that because the only place this was written down was on data sheets. They were buying so many companies at the time. This is about 10 years ago, 5-10 years ago. They're buying so many companies that the only place to get this answer was a data sheet. So a system engineer had to go out and find the data sheet, sit down with a piece of paper, figure out what the heat dissipation was for this particular device, and then manually try to configure the rack. With that information online, even a new system engineer can pretty quickly become productive by finding the information they need. So there is some return to that, but I can't tell you how many dollars and cents it's going to get to you. That's why I say this is a tough ROI case to try to justify. So that's the different kinds of enterprise searches. Let's look into now, how do you recognize that you've got a metadata problem? Well, there's two big categories I'd like to suggest to you. One is low adoption. People aren't using search very much. Evaluate your search and click activity. Some symptoms: you have a low number of opens on an initial document result page. You do a search, the first 10 results come back, and people don't open those documents. They say next page. That's a sign maybe you've got a metadata problem because people aren't finding the data they're looking for. A measurement that people sometimes don't think of looking at is the high number of stale documents. And by stale documents, I mean the number of documents that show up in searches over and over and over, but which no one ever clicks on. Those are good candidates for you, by the way, to decide this content should maybe move to an offline repository or a lower priority repository, because if people aren't looking at it, it's not very good populating your result list with it. Repeated clicks using similar terms. If they search for proposal and then immediately, without looking at any documents, they search for proposal for telecom companies, and then look for proposals for switches for telecom companies. All of this with no click-through, that means they're having a problem finding some data. That's a clue that they've got a metadata problem. The metadata that's out there is just not working right. One of the and web logs that show your external calls. This is a case where someone's been searching for a little while, and all of a sudden they say, "Oh, heck with it! I'm just going to go look on the Google.com and see what they can tell me." And that does sometimes happen. You can tell that from your log activity. The other half of recognizing a metadata problem is I call active feedback. You don't get buy-in from content owners. They aren't concerned with finding data, which is a bad thing. You want to encourage them. You want to get their buy-in. But some things you'll hear is, why don't we just use Google? Or this search sucks. Someday I'm going to do a survey during the webinar to see how many people have actually heard that kind of content. There's a trick, and if you've been to some of our webinars before, and I see some people who are there who are familiar faces, when they say, why don't we use Google, what they're saying is, gosh, I really want to have search that is as simple and as easy to use as Google is, and it comes back with results. You can do that. We've talked about that in other webinars. We'll talk a little bit about it in a little bit. But what they're asking for is search that just seems to know what they're doing. You can do that with good enough metadata. So I'd invite you that, yes, you can provide Google. You can get Google if you want, but you have to do it yourself, even if you're not using Google. By the way, I always, it sounds like I'm bad-mouthing Google, and I'm not. Google's got a great search engine. It's quite scalable. And for a lot of cases, a lot of use cases, it works pretty darn well. But when people are saying, why don't we use Google, or why isn't it just like Google, what they're saying is, I want search that just seems to know what I'm doing. There's a case, Deloitte & Touche, you've probably heard me tell this story before if you've been here before. Deloitte & Touche spoke at a conference a year or two back, and they talked about their experience of having selected FAST for their SharePoint search back in, I think, 2004. And people didn't like the search at all, so they said, well, you know, why aren't we using Google Search? So when they rolled out New Search in 2007, they did use the Google Search Appliance. But the mistake they made is that they didn't put in the button that said powered by Google. So the first thing they heard when they rolled out the new search was people said, why didn't we buy Google? This search sucks. Well, it was Google. It just didn't say Google. So there's a lot to be said in that button. And you've probably heard me say before, one of our customers actually said if they thought if they could just license the powered by Google icon, they wouldn't need to replace search engines because that would make everything fine. So it's a challenge for content owners, is the best I'll say there. So there's a couple of ways to fix the problem. One is through behavioral changes. That is, you're going to change some of the things that you do. One of the things that's easy to emulate the public Google search engine. What's that? I mean, you've got a simple search form. It's clear, simple, obvious what to do. You'll use the context. This is a little more complicated. We talked about this in a webinar a couple of months ago on taking advantage of all the context you've got. That's things about the user, things about the query, things about the repositories. This is essentially static metadata that you've got loaded and dynamic metadata that you can figure out. Where is this user coming from? What is this user's job? What do they look like? What does the query look like? Is it a phone number? If it looks like a phone number, they're probably trying to look up someone's name. If it looks like a department name, they might be looking up the products. If they're the product name, they're looking for the data sheet. So you can use that context. The bad news is that user requirements drive vendor features. So the vendors are always trailing what we really want to be doing. So some of this you have to do yourself. The other thing, by the way, going back to, I said e-discovery and e-commerce, one thing they have in common is that people are looking at what's going on. They're being monitored. In the case of e-discovery, they're being monitored by opposing counsel and prosecutors. In case of e-commerce, there's a product line manager who's looking at search activity each and every day. They can tell you how many people clicked where and when. The CEO of eBay gave a great talk at the Consumer Electronics Show this year where he talked about some conversations he had with a brick-and-mortar CEO. And the brick-and-mortar CEO said, gosh, I'm jealous of what you guys know because when I look at my data at the end of the day, I know about how many people came into a store. I have some idea how many people came in through different departments just based on how we have to staff them. And I know what they bought and how much they paid. You, eBay, just like you as a search owner, you know who came in, you know what they looked at and bought, what they paid, and how long they poked around your site. You know all that stuff if you look at it. So with your search activity, monitor and adjust the search to make sure you're covering it. You might remember I said with sort of the policies and procedures content, the queries tend to be pretty much the same all the time. You can fix problems in search by knowing the queries that people are going to ask and doing best bets. Put them in there so that when someone searches for 401k, you put a couple options up there, sign up, enrollment period, whatever. You can take care of that and solve those problems. Another thing is you want to actively encourage user feedback. On the result list, put a big blob there somewhere that says, tell us how we're doing. And the good news is people will tell you if it's not working. You won't hear from the people who are happy, so it can be a little depressing. You want to make sure you get some get a chance to walk around after lunch after you've looked at those comments. But you need some precise comments. The more precise they can be, the better, because your content's changing all the time. One customer we have said they get feedback from customers, but the customers say, I did the search and none of the results were good. The trouble is the people looking at the search activity are not specialists in the area that the user is. So you look at the search activity, it's like, well, you know, these documents all look like they have the words and related words in them, so I don't know why these are bad versus something good. So you really want to go back to the user and say, all right, you did this search, said it was bad. Tell me what's wrong with this and what would you like to have seen. It takes time, it takes energy, but it's a lot cheaper than replacing your search engine, which is eventually going to be the problem that you're pressed into doing. Also, encourage and recognize good metadata at content creation. If you've got people writing content, maybe a content creation department, recognize the people who are getting good content in there. If it's up to each individual, one of the ways I've seen this done is actually in a Search Center newsletter. One of our customers does, is he mentions he says, okay, congratulations, this month these two people have content that's been really findable. They really tag their documents well, and it's easy to find, so it's really good content. So they get called out in front of a lot of people to see what's going on. That's actually the social engineering that you could maybe pull off inside your company. Then the other problem is the quality of your metadata. If you rely on people to enter data without encouragement, without some kind of rationale and buy-in, they're not going to do very good metadata. Some companies actually have standard metadata, which I think is an atrocious idea. You don't want to have maybe a fixed vocabulary for most metadata, because then you're just going to have, if you have thousands of things with the same word in it, you're going to have thousands of documents that may well be completely unrelated. There are a wide range of tools and methods that you can use to do that, and the cost varies widely. For example, we talk a lot about behavior-based taxonomies or behavior-based metadata. Behavior-based metadata is the cheapest taxonomy you have, and it's probably the most important. Behavior-based taxonomies are taxonomies of the terms that people actually use on your search engine. You look at your search logs, those words are your behavior-based taxonomy. Do a chart of how many times each of these searches shows up. Make sure the top 20 or 30 or 40 return good results by either best bets or by query tuning. You're going to get pretty happy customers. So that's kind of, it's not free because you're obviously going to spend some time doing that, but it's not external money. It's a sunk cost because they're going to pay someone to be sitting there anyway. Have them do something that returns some value. There's also the opportunity of creating custom taxonomies. There are ways, a lot of people will do that. In fact, there's some very good consultants we work with who have created a career out of creating great taxonomies. They're library science people, they're subject matter experts. They understand taxonomies and they build them really well. One of the downsides we think to taxonomies, one of my friends up in the East Bay here, I kid a lot. One of the problems is when a customer says to me, well, we're interested in search, but before we do the search project, we're building up a corporate taxonomy, and then we'll come back and put in search. And I think to myself, well, okay, you'll be back in a few years because it takes a while to build a taxonomy. It's not an either or, it's a both at the same time, I think. And then there's some good automated tools. There are automated tools that you can use that will generate taxonomy, and there's a range of automated tools as well. Well, I'll show you here. We've got a couple of different companies we partner with, and these are just a few of the companies that do the kinds of things we're talking about here, but I wanted to mention them to you. One is a little company from Australia, just coming to the United States about a year ago, called Pingar. Pingar is actually very interesting. They have a whole suite of tools, among which is an automated taxonomy generator. It can actually go through and do entity extraction. It can pick out names of people and places and things and phone numbers. You can use this not only for entity extraction for facets, but you can also create taxonomies. And they will take a seed. If you can give it a little information on the kind of taxonomy you're looking for, they'll use that. But for the most part, it's dynamic and happens automatically. There's a company called Wand, which is in Denver, we've worked with for years. They're in the business creating human-created or providing human-created taxonomies in vertical markets. So they can give you a taxonomy for general business terms. They can give you a pharmacological taxonomy. They can give you HR terms, and they license and sell those and you can put into any search engine. Those are high-quality taxonomies, and you can extend them, but they'll come out with updates, so there's always some issues around there. Concept Searching is a company, actually one of the founders of that from South Africa. I knew him when I worked at Verity hundreds of years ago. Concept Searching is an interesting company because what they do is they will build an automatic taxonomy, but they really say, look, here's what you want to do. Seed it a little bit. Give us some top-level ideas. What do? Are you a drug company? Do you make automobiles? Are you a bank? Let's see some terms in here, and then we'll build an automatic taxonomy for you. But we give you a console because we'd like to have human validation. We'd like a subject matter expert to come in after we make our guesses and tell us where we went right, where we went wrong, and so we can keep tuning as we go. So it's a kickstart for manual human validation taxonomy. And then, as I said, there's custom taxonomies. You can bring someone in, a skilled taxonomist, to build a taxonomy that's custom to your industry, custom to your site, and you'll know what it's for. Remember, I said though, one of the cheapest ways to this is the behavior-based taxonomy. If you haven't looked to see what people are searching for, I think you're missing a bet. And you're going to be spending too much money, even getting started with these kinds of things. So these are good companies. If you're interested, you can certainly find them on the web, or I can introduce you to the people we talk to there. I'll be happy to do that for you. So if you are interested in finding out more about these companies, feel free to drop us a line after the webinar, and we can get you some introductions. So in terms of taxonomies, no matter how you build your taxonomy, once the tagging is done, there's some things to be aware of. First of all, changes of vocabulary. New products, new technologies, new employees, new parts of your site. The vocabulary is going to change. People change in what they're looking for over time. Be aware of that. Remember the monitoring part? Monitor to see what's going on there. Make sure that can feed back in to update into your taxonomy. Have a plan for it so that as new content adds, you add new taxonomy, or the taxonomies are relevant. And ideally, the updates are not every year, every 6 months, but they're dynamic and ongoing. They're continuous. That's part of the monitor and adjust. Monitor and adjust. That's what Google does. That makes it so good. That's what people who have e-commerce responsibilities do to make it good. That's the kind of things that you really need to get in there. When your manager says, "I want," your boss says, "I want search just like Google," say, "Great, I want a team to analyze search results just like Google." That's it's my story. I'm sticking to it. So, not always as easy as it might seem. So finally, I want to just talk about some key takeaways for you. First thing I want to do is quantify some of the metrics for your site. So I want you to go out and figure out the kinds of searches that you've got, because you've probably got 2 or 3 types of searches that you're doing in-house, the HR, maybe an R&D portal, HR portal. You want to make sure that you can quantify what's your metric. What are you looking for from each of those sites, and how will you measure it when it happens? How will you know it's good? How will you know it's bad? Certainly encourage tagging at content creation time. If individuals are creating query content, encourage them to put some metadata in. You can certainly tell if there are a lot of duplicate documents, a lot of duplicate metadata. If you've got 30 or 40 documents for the same metadata and the same author, you might go back to the author and say, you know, maybe all these are about the same thing, but you might think about something else. Keep the search form and the search results simple. Make it easy to use. Make it look like Google. Use the context. We had a whole webinar about this not too long ago. In fact, I think the workshop I'm giving in Enterprise Search Summit next month is on using the context. That some people call it query cooking. As users, we're ahead of the vendors. You know, when the first search engines came out, they did exact match. Now you can do sound alike, you can do stemming, you can do all kinds of different things, but we want more. We want to be able to use the context. There was if you ever search on Google for a Federal Express tracking ID, one of my favorite stories, you'll find that if you type in a 12-digit number that meets the same format that FedEx uses, you'll get a suggestion to track the package on FedEx. An arbitrary 12-digit number will not work. And trust me, that is not in the Google search engine. That is before it gets to the search engine. In the same way, you may need to do some work before you pass a query to the search engine to help the search engine figure out what the context is. Is this your CEO's name? Well, you can probably do something about that. Maybe they're looking for a phone number or an email address. You can intercept the query and push that into the result list ahead of the search results. Facilitate and take action on feedback. Nothing worse than having a button that says give us feedback and the users know that nothing ever happens. If someone takes the time to write your search center a question, I'm having a problem with the search, get in touch with them. Find out what kind of problem they're having, work with them. A little bit of effort goes a long way in terms of getting back to the user community. when someone at lunch could say, gosh, I had this problem searching, and this really nice person from the search center got a hold of me. We solved the problem. I know what I was doing wrong, or they fixed the data. That gets run quickly. That's going to solve the search sucks feedback that we talked about at lunch. And then ongoing monitoring tuning. I know it sounds like a broken record. I can't say enough about it. You really need to go on. You've got to have staffing. You've got to have time to go and do automatic monitoring, or monitoring all the time. You want to look at your statistics. If you're not getting the statistics you need, get them written. You can get the data. You can be just like the eBay guy. You can know all the things this user's got. You know where they're coming from. Use that in your results. So, actually, got this little out of order here. I'll tell you what our next webinar is, because that's the next slide. In fact, on May 24th, which is the week after Enterprise Search New York, we're going to do a webinar that's called "Is Open Source Search Ready for You?" There's a real interest in open source search, but we've found that sometimes it's not quite what some companies are looking for. So I want to help. This will help sort of do an inventory of what some of the open source search options are out there, what strengths and weaknesses of each, and are you really ready to take in open source search? That's the real question. So having said that, let's open to questions. Do we have any here? What do you got?
All right, so questions. It looks like we have something from Evan. You say watch for a low number of open documents from the search results list. What is low?
Oh, thank you, Evan. You ask a tough one. That's a tough question. That's like the hard question that's easy, or the easy question that's hard. The question is, what's a low number of queries? That's real hard to tell because it varies within industries. It's sort of a feeling you have. It's if you've got 10,000 users and only a couple hundred of them are searching each week, you've got a low number. If you've got 500 users and none of them search, then you've got another problem. By the way, I should say, lack of complaints is not a sign that everything's working. We actually went into one customer. We were talking about some search analytics. They said, we don't need search analytics. Search is fine. I go, how do you know that? And like, well, nobody ever calls us about it. Nobody ever complains. In fact, one of the options there is actually people have abandoned your search and aren't using it at all, which is why they're not having any problems with it. So one other thing I'll say here, I told you we did some statistics for a couple of companies. One of the things we're working on right now is trying to gather more statistics on this kind of information. So if you and your company would be interested in contributing some data, we'll be happy to sign an NDA, of course. We'll be happy to feed the information back to you anonymized that we find from all the different companies and industries we're talking to. We've got 5 or 6 companies now that we're working with to get the data. When we're done with that, we're going to categorize results and send them back. If your company is interested and able to participate, we'd love to hear from you and help us out with that. So maybe by one of these next webinars we do, we'll actually have a good answer for that. Thanks. What else you got?
So we have Josie's asking about monitor and adjust activity. How often should that happen?
Okay, another good soft ROI hard question or tough question. How often are you going to monitor and adjust things? That sort of depends on a lot of things. Where in the rollout cycle are you? Have you just rolled out search, or is your content pretty stable? At initial rollout, you probably want to do very frequent, maybe even daily for a while. Also, if you add significant new content or a major new repository, if that comes online, look at it daily for a while until you start seeing stability. After that, you might be able to get in a weekly or even monthly. What's going to happen probably is, at least in the policies and procedures kind of information, and perhaps even in the knowledge work information, you'll start to see some seasonal variation. And you can imagine in October, people are starting to look at holiday schedules and vacation hours, maybe tax opportunities, things they can do before the end of the year to help impact their taxes. In April, you're looking for W-2s. In summertime, you're looking for who knows what. You'll see these seasonal variations that you can then predict and, in fact, solve the problem by bringing those best bets in and rolling them out over time. When a best bet goes up, it doesn't have to be there always. So that's something you want to look at. So it varies a lot, but really when you got brand new content, you want to do a lot of looking and tweaking right away, and then maybe you can stabilize it some. All right?
Okay, so we have time for one last question. And Bruce is asking, where would you categorize customer forums that are run outside of the company as a service?
Okay, so this is like social boards or group support things that are pretty common in companies. they are an outside service, but they show up on your website. The fact that it's hosted someplace else is irrelevant. It really is an enterprise search application. And what you need to do is, in the same way that you track, it's another source of enterprise data, even though it's coming from outside. So you do need to have access to what people are searching for. If the service is doing their own search, if they have their own search-enabled conference board or social board, you need to make sure you can get that information in from them, and that you have the ability to go out and tweak that yourself, just as you would if it was your own internal content. So it really doesn't matter where the enterprise content is hosted, what computer it sits on, whether it's in the cloud or in your IT department. You need to do the same kind of thing. So it's essentially it's internal content that you're going to treat like any other external-facing enterprise search application. So if that answers your question, feel free to write if I didn't answer the question. We'll take it from there, though. All right, anything else, Chris? Looks like I don't see anything there.
I think we're all covered.
So I would invite you to remember to come back in a month or so. We will have the Ask Dr. Search online shortly. A month from now, come learn about the open source search engines that are out there and how they fit in companies and which ones might have a good fit for what you're doing. Thanks so much for your time. Chris, thank you.
Thank you all very much. Have a good day, and tell our friends to come visit us tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.